Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Resident Evil. Welcome to Raccoon City. So, I want to out front say right now that, I've watched quite a few Resident Evil video game playthroughs of certain people like Markiplier and kind of the big head honcho ones of people that have gone and done Resident Evil video games. Uh, I have seen quite a few of the other Resident Evil films, and so when going into this movie, how did I feel about this Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City movie? Well, I would have to say that this Resident Evil world that they kind of put this in does feel more realistic, like this could actually be a thing that happens. Like the other Resident Evil franchise kind of built up these Resident Evil movies to be so outlandish and so I'm sorry, there's no way that someone could have actually built something like this, or there's no way that they could have had something like this in a real world scenario. And I thought that was so goofy about the original Resident Evil franchise. And so in this iteration, in this thing, it does have a bit of realism for it, but we do have to build a lot of things. We do have to kind of give people investments of certain characters, and so that does kind of slow the movie down. And we do have to kind of tell certain origins of how people got to this place, got into Raccoon City at some point. And so I could say for this movie does have a potential to go on and build for a better sequel. But for this movie, I honestly feel that I was kind of waiting for something interesting to happen throughout most of this movie. The movie doesn't really ramp up until 50 minutes in, to where you're just like, oh, something's really, really cool is going to happen here. And then it stops, and then you're like, oh, what? This is where a cool part to ramp up movie is going to happen. And it just, it never gets there. We never get the ramping up part of this film, and when we do get to something possibly that's going to escalate this film, it never quite gets there. It's just this flat overall film that never has this kind of escalation of things, and that's the only real negative thing that I have about this movie. It just, you're just waiting for the excitement to happen. You're waiting for, when is this town going to really just pop off, and there's going to be a number of zombies that you have to kill, and I'm waiting for this big, massive zombie-like character to come through. I'm waiting for a massive budget movie, and I'm not getting that. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess this is just to open a door to have people want to go into another one. But I like the realism here. I like how this movie does stay very true to the game, and we have stuff like the turnaround zombie that had been a very pivotal thing for the Resident Evil game. We also have the liquor Resident Evil monster with the whole kind of brain popping out, and the kind of on all fours monsterish thing. And so, and that all eventually escalates to have, of course, one guy going in and taking a vial and morphing into this much bigger creature towards the end of this film, because we always have to have that kind of thing in a Resident Evil film. Very visually interesting, this film. I really did enjoy it. But I was just wanting something more. I was just waiting for something more, and that never came. And so for probably Resident Evil fans, they'll probably be satisfied with this movie, and I can understand that. There's some people that might have just been wanting, like, man, I would have wanted, like, yeah, give me like a big, huge CGI'd like thing. Um, because I just recently saw like the Resident Evil like animated movie, and like I was expecting that in this. Like I was expecting like big, massive monsters. I was expecting uh like world, like a big world fight kind of deal. Like I was expecting there to be this like huge um battle of random people versus zombies, but like we're at the very, and I mean very early stages of a breakout of sorts. And so I guess this movie is to perfectly show that or showcase that. And so I guess like in a sequel, we're going to see much more of a mass outbreak. And so we should be much more satisfied with that, I guess. Um, it'll be more interesting to see sequels than this movie. So basically this is just like, hey, wait, I would probably say wait till this movie conveniently comes out in some kind of premium access or some kind of app somewhere, and probably watch the heck out of it. I know that's probably bound to happen. um, like I don't know if I would really go out of my way to see this in theaters, just because I am not a like hardcore Resident. I've seen so many of the games, and they do so many creative things with these characters, that when looking at this movie, it just kind of like it doesn't equal like to any video game that I've seen. So it just like it falls short. So with that said, I think that's all that I wanted to say about this film. Coming from a person that I don't want to say that I know a lot about Resident Evil, but like I would know enough to get by. And plus, also like when I was going through and I was watching this movie, I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know what this is. Like, I'm gonna have to go and look up the name just because, like, I want to make sure that I'm trying to do this review justice. And for those people that are like Resident Evil people, I want to like make sure that like I can like describe something or have give a name to something to where they're just like, oh yeah, I know exactly what that is, because I've played the game, I've done whatever. So with that said, let's just go into that spoiler time, because it's about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. Like, I think I would probably go back and probably look at this film differently at some point. Like, I think I would probably have to, like, watch this and then wait X amount of time till sequel comes out and be like, hey, let's go and rewatch this movie so I can have the clear consensus about how I felt about this movie. And maybe I'll feel wildly different, but there probably just needs some time in between for me to just like, oh no, this is a way different assessment um, over X amount of time, because really it just breaks down to me just being like a person that uh, is to kind of be a casual Resident Evil person. So with that said, let's just spoil this movie. Let's go into spoiler time. So the very beginning of this movie is to start off at a Raccoon City orphanage where we have both Claire and Chris going and sleeping in the same bed, and both Claire and Chris are brother and sister. And so it seems that Claire is seemingly having some nightmare, or possibly just having some imaginary friend like thing where she is to see this monster. So, of course, Claire is to be very upset with all this. And so there is to be William Birkin, who is to come in, who's actually Neil McDonough. Very, like, amazing guy. I had recently just saw him do this interview with him and Michael Rosenbaum on Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum. Great guy. Freaking, like, the one part where he is to mention that he loves his wife more than he loves his craft was such, like, a beautiful interview. And go ahead and check that out. Like, such an interesting interview with that guy, Neil McDonough. And so, William, who's Neil McDonough, goes into here and is to try and comfort Claire, and so we kind of just see this moment as like us kind of like introducing that Claire is to seemingly like see things or to have this prior knowledge over what Chris has. So that kind of puts a weird pin in that, and then we have to go into like present day where Claire and Chris are much older. So Claire is to make her way on to getting back to Chris, and so when she is to make it back to Raccoon City, unfortunately the trucker that is driving her to this location is to accidentally run over somebody. And we have this trucker who's like, oh my god, like, I can't believe I just did this. She just came out of nowhere. And so the trucker is to go and look away from the dead body, and so also is Claire. And so conveniently, this woman is to get right back up and walk away. And the dog is going and licking this woman's blood. And I'm like, okay, how horrible is this going to just turn? I'm like, when is this dog going to turn into a zombie sometime today? So the trucker and Claire just get right back into the truck, and they're just like, well, like, maybe we shouldn't tell anybody about this. Maybe this girl's actually fine. And like, because they didn't ask her anything, they didn't go and look for her, like. And so Claire and the trucker, like, the trucker drops off Claire, and the trucker is trying to like really ask Claire, like, hey, like, maybe that didn't happen, right? And so Claire is like, sure, whatever. So Claire goes and finds Chris's house, and she picks the lock to get in there. And so Claire is going on and is thumbing through Chris's stuff, seeing photos, and it seems that Chris seems to have some attraction to some girl named Jill. And then Chris is to have a picture of William and him like together. And Chris is to kind of pop in and say like, oh yeah, like, hey, like, William's always been a father to me, and much more of a family member than you ever were. So Chris is kind of like asking Claire, it's like, hey, where have you been? Like, why haven't you like called, wrote anything? So they're kind of catching up. And so also Chris is to also be asking, it's like, well, hey, like, how is it that you got in here? And she's like, well, I picked the lock. And he's like, well, that's a very lavish lock. How did you even like pick that lock? And Claire is just like, well, like, because I easily could. And it's like, wow, you've really picked up some skills along your way. So so Claire is going and showcasing to Chris some video about a guy, I believe his name is Ben, who is to mention that the water is being poisoned in Raccoon City, and that people are going to eventually start to get sick. And Chris is like, wow, this is kind of weird. This is kind of morbid. So Chris is to, of course, get called off to work. And so Chris ends up telling Claire, it's like, well, whatever you do, don't mess with my bike. Like, do whatever you want, just don't mess with my bike. And so Chris ends up going off. So we have these two police officers who are kind of just messing around. We have both Jill and we have uh, Wesker, um, who are going and placing a bid that Jill can actually knock this, uh, like I think this pop can or something like that. And so Jill goes on and is to grab her real gun, and so Wesker is like, no, like not with this real gun, like use this toy gun and take it down that way. And so we have Jill, who of course figures out how to knock over that can, and then pops Wesker in the head with this toy little thing, and then she's like, "Okay, pay up." So, because we just find that Leonard or Leon is here, and he's kind of like falling asleep everywhere he is to kind of go here. So Leon is to wake up, and there seems to be some other like police officers who are kind of talking to the diner people, and then go to meet to see Leon and be like, "Oh, you must be the rookie guy. You must be the new recruit. Like, didn't you go in your last city and go and like shoot your partner or something?" And Leon is like, "Well, that was an accident." And they were like, "Well, like." So they're kind of looking at his gear and they're like, well, what does the S stand for, stupid? So they're heckling him and making fun of him, but then they walk off. And so Jill is to tell Leon, it's like, well, hey, like, with people in this town, it's something to get used to. Like, they'll warm up to you eventually. So just kind of like take everything they tell you with a grain of salt, because like it's something that you're gonna have to get used to because you're new in town. So everybody is to head off to, of course, the precinct because they got a job to do. So we have everybody in this room: Chris, Wesker, Jill, everybody, and so the Chief Brian Irons, who is actually Donald Log. Log. I've seen him in a number of things. Like you can see him in like the Gotham show and so on. Like I always like this character. He's always really fun. Like I've seen him in the movie Ghost Rider, and always really liked Donald. Really fun character. I wish that they could like. I wish he was in a lot more things. In all honesty, but anyways, so this chief is getting everyone in here, and so all of a sudden Leon is in there, and so Chief Brian is telling Leon, it's like, "What are you doing here?" And so Leon is like, "Well, like you told me to come in," and like he's like, "No, no, not you. Like you just go and uh, you just go and man the phones or man the entrance to this place. Like you just go and you just hold it down over there, because we don't want anybody coming in here and there's no one in here, and some crazy old lady is to come in here and start a ruckus or something because no one's in here. So Leon, go and man the phones." So Chief Brian is to mention that there had been this Bravo team who was to have gone to this mansion, and they had supposedly never came back. And so they're like, okay, that's weird. So we now have Chief Brian, who's telling this team to go off to make it to this mansion. And so all of a sudden we have Wesker, who's getting this page. And so now, like, Chief Brian is kind of chewing him out, just saying, like, hey, like, what's the page about? Like, are you going on a date tonight? And Wesker is like, well, like, something like that. And so Chief Brian is like, well, hey, like, and weirdly, there's so many references in this movie that have nothing to do with current time. Like, it feels like this is like a 90s or an 80s movie or something, where, like, he's talking about Planet Hollywood, and he's talking about renting a movie and all this other stuff. And I'm like, what year is this? Like, what year is this movie, weirdly, where you're doing all this stuff and there's a Planet Hollywood somewhere? Because I thought that that place, like, corrupted, or I thought that that place ran out of business or something. Like, I don't know why there's a Planet Hollywood somewhere where you have to go and, like, I think they were just kind of throwing weird things out there to be funny. So Cheap Brian is saying, like, the only thing that these people need to do is to focus on where the heck Bravo team is and going to this mansion. And so they're taking this helicopter. I'm like, why would they go on and take this helicopter? Like, I get it where you could probably have this whole team make it there fairly quickly, but when also looking at it, I'm like, shouldn't the helicopter be there in case of an emergency that breaks out? Like I guess when Bravo team is to not be there, I guess that could be emergency enough. So, and maybe they just assume that this is such a small town that they won't have that kind of problem. So, Bravo team goes off uh or Bravo team. So this team goes off and is to try and make their way to this mansion. And before Whisker is to leave, he is to find this thing in his locker saying that Raccoon City will be annihilated by X amount of time. So it seems that Whisker is to get a thing of knowledge that no one else will, because we find out that Wesker is to get this certain kind of task from some secret organization. And so they head on to this mansion. So let's put a pin in that for a second. So we also have this flashback where Birkin was talking to Claire and saying that they had found a family, possibly for Claire, and so in a younger Claire. And so they were taking younger Claire to this place for this family, but they were just trying to force her to go into this room so they could experiment on her. Because we find out that Birkin had been experimenting on a number of these orphanage kids to see what the end result would be. And if this person basically died on this table, well, like they could just say that this person was to find a home. Birkin was to confirm with Claire that Claire and her brother Chris will also, like, they won't be separated. They'll find a family for both of them and so on and so forth. But they're just lying to her just to be able to experiment on her. So, and at some point in this movie, they slap a thing on Claire's paperwork saying that she's dangerous. So, pushing on. So, Birkin is to also be a much older man, and this is a much more current time. And I guess Birkin had gone on to adopt another kid. Another kid who is, I guess, to have nightmares. And so Birkin comes in and is to comfort his child. And so Birkin is to, like, say, like, hey, like, what was it that you were dreaming about, kid? And so the kid goes, it's like, well, it was a green monster. And he's going, like this. And so Birkin was like, yeah, I'd be scared of that too. Like, So, so Birkin all of a sudden is to get this phone call. And so he is to get this phone call from these people telling him that he has to get the F out of here. Like, he has to go on and scramble to a safe place. So Birkin is telling his wife and his daughter, like, we got to get everything right now. We have to leave right at this moment. because there's something about my research that is like has caused a problem, and so now we got to get out of here. So Birkin is to make his way to Raccoon City Orphanage because there is a secret uh, passage to a way to safety to leave this town, as well as there's also in this mansion, conveniently, a secret passage to make their way to a underground train station, which is to also connected to this Raccoon City orphanage, that all these people all meet underground to have safe passage to get to this train station to get out of this town safely, supposedly. So, but so Berkeley is to be driving, and he almost accidentally runs over Claire in her motorcycle that she stole from Chris. And so Claire is to kind of pop her kind of eye thing and look Birkin right in the eye. And then she drives off and he drives off. So where should we go to next? Let's go back to uh, let's go to Chief Brian and Leon. So we have, of course, the trucker, because we start having people slowly but surely come to be zombies. So the dog had slowly but surely is turning into a zombie. And so the zombie dog is to bite the trucker. And because the trucker is like, oh man, I hope, dog, that you're not getting sick, because like I don't have the insurance to like cover you. So the dog bites this trucker, and so he's like, ah, you bit me. And so the dog is, of course, turning into this zombie, but slowly but surely also is this trucker. So we just have these like kind of rando characters turning to zombies. And before Claire was to leave Chris's place, trying to make it back to where Chris was, Claire was to be attacked by their neighbors, and their neighbors had made their way into Chris's home, and one neighbor broke through Chris's glass door to attack Claire, and so Claire like figured out a way to get rid of or get away from these people, drive off in this motorcycle, and make her way to this precinct. So the trucker was to go on and crash right in front of the RPD building. And so there was to be this like flaming zombie that walks into this department, and Leon is sleeping listening to some old-fashioned song. And so all of a sudden, finally, Leon is wake up. I'm like, oh my god! And so we have the chief who just fire extinguishers this zombie, and is to say, it's like, well, hey, like more of these are to be coming, like lock these doors and get ready for the worst. And so Chief Brian is freaking taking up all of his stuff. He's like, dude, I'm out of here. I quit. I'm done. Because Chief Brian is trying to make his way out of the city. And so Leon is like, wait, well, who's going to be in charge? And Chief Brian is like, well, you are now. Like, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to make my way out of this town because there's something going on that I know about. So Leon is just like, well, okay then. So we have Chief Brian going into his car, like trying to get this car running. And all of a sudden, Chief Brian is to almost be attacked by this zombie dog. And so all of a sudden Claire comes out of nowhere with, I think, this fire extinguisher, and just smashes up this dog and kills the dog, sadly, because even though it's a zombie dog, it's still a dog. So now Chief Brian is like, where did you come from? And so they're like, well, hey, we got to get out of here. We got to figure out a safe passage way out of here. And so, because Chief Brian was to go on and try to drive through the streets of Raccoon City, but he couldn't get out. Like, he couldn't find a good road, and he ended up having to ditch his car to make it all the way back to this place just to get attacked by the zombie dog, to have them try and figure out where is the next place for them to head, which is basically just Raccoon City's orphanage. So, because there is to be a safe passage through there. So, because Chief Brian is to try to call the helicopter, and there is no word from the helicopter for a good reason. So, let's now transition to the mansion and why the helicopter is having a little bit of this thing called difficulty contacting Chief Brian. So, now going into this mansion, we have them go in here, and immediately when they go into this building, I'm like, this feels so like familiar to a Resident Evil game. And I'm sure that it's like, well, because it is. It's like, it's a copy and paste from so and so Resident Evil like thing. And I think I've seen something like this before. It seems so familiar. So they go through this mansion, and like they're just for the longest time finding Bubkiss nothing, until there seems to actually be a zombie here. And then once they get one zombie, which they're kind of not really understanding what's going on here, and they're kind of like, we get a lot of people who are wasting a lot of bullets trying to kill these zombies. And so we have Chris, Wesker, and Jill eventually start to get outnumbered with zombies after they go and find some other Bravo team member that is now bleeding out and is going to die. So they start getting overwhelmed, and it seems like we're to assume that all of these characters are going to all die at this moment, but then we'd be completely wrong about that. So, like, we just have these characters turn around and they make it out of here. So, what ends up happening is we have the helicopter, who is to be taken over of his helicopter by zombies. And so this helicopter is to go on and crash into this mansion. And so Wesker and Jill were to go on to this one spot of this mansion. And so Wesker was going and figuring out to hit these certain keys on this piano. And then all of a sudden, this helicopter comes flying through this wall, pushing them to try and figure out a way to like brace themselves or find a place of protection so they could live throughout this moment. So Wesker is to go and find this hidden passage into this mansion, and is to tell Jill, hey, like, I'm going to go through here to like save my life, because this is a secret hidden passageway to get to this train station to get us out of Raccoon City, so like we can live, because this city is going to get wiped out today, like, or tonight, like during the night. So I'm sorry I didn't tell all of you that I'm sorry I didn't tell you this now, but like this is happening now, so let's go. Or you can just go without me and just kind of wait for people and see how that all plays out. So Wesker goes down and is to meet up with Birkin. And so now Birkin is there kind of going and trying to get these vials. and is to try and protect his years of work that he has amassed. So while they're going and getting these vials, we have Wesker who comes in and is like, okay, give me the vials. Like, I need this. And Birkins is like, no, you're not going to take my years of work from me. So now Wesker is to have to forcibly shoot Birkin. And now Birkin is to tell his wife to give him one of the vials. And Wesker is like, no, don't take it. And Birkin takes one of these vials. And so he, of course, is going to slowly but surely, like, it seems like he's going to be dead at first, but then he slowly but surely starts to morph into, of course, a much massive zombified monsterish creature. So we have Chief Brian, Leon, and so before Chief Brian, Leon, and Claire make it to the orphanage, we have Leon, who is to have one prisoner who is making way too much noise, because it seems there's to be a prisoner within his cell that is turning into a zombie. And so we have, coincidentally, Ben, who was to be this guy in this video, like, telling us the truth about all what was going on. I guess they had forcibly arrested him because he was spouting off the truth. And so Leon is to go and see Ben here, and he's like, well, hey, why are you in prison? And Ben's like, because I told the truth. Like, there's no other reason for why I could have been imprisoned here but telling the truth. So we have Leon, who rescues Ben, just for it to be an all for naught kind of thing, because reasonably, these guys end up turning, and so Leon has to kind of shoot into them, just like, man, this was a mistake. So Leon, Claire, and Chief Brian all head to this Raccoon City orphanage to go on and try to seek safe passage or way out of here. Luckily, I guess all these people kind of connect together at the right time, and so on and so forth. So now we have these characters making it to this orphanage, and we see this sickly mom who is to be there, that has this kind of like mask on one side, and her face is through this like weird like small hole. And so we can kind of see that this person is going to like slowly but surely like possibly change or be this monstrous being. And so all of a sudden Claire, Leon, and Chief Brian are to be in this environment, to all of a sudden have a liquor be in this orphanage. And we're like, oh, okay, this is where the movie picks up, to all of a sudden have us just turn around and have this sickly mother go and snap the neck of this liquor like monster. And I'm like, ah, like, mother. So we have this sickly mother kind of telling these people where to go. And so they head off into this secret way to make it to where all the other people are. So Wesker is going on, and he's still present here. And so Wesker is going to turn his gun on Birkin's kid, and Jill ends up shooting him for having this gun pointed at this kid. And so Chris comes in and shields this kid, and Jill comes in and is to comfort a dying Wesker. And so Wesker is to apologize for what all he had done here, and he told the kid that he wasn't going to pull a trigger on him. He wasn't going to shoot the kid. And so Wesker ends up dying here. So Wesker is to tell Chris and Jill where the heck to go to get into this train station. And so while they're making their way there to where they're supposed to go, Birkin is to slowly but surely turn into this mutant Resident Evil boss monster that is to go and try to uh, basically heckle Chris and so on and so forth. So we have Becker, who is to just kind of intimidate Chris and mention that Claire was much more smarter than he was, and like he's really just kind of telling him the truth of like basically like this kid was just to be used uh, to one day have some kind of real benefit for him. So we have at some point that uh, like these characters are going and fighting it out, and so Birkin ends up with a bullet in the head, and they are just naturally assuming, oh well, Birkin's now dead, we should just go off and head to this train. So all of our characters now all head onto this train. We have Leon, we have Claire, we have Chris, we have Jill, we have all of these characters making their way on to this train. And so we have them trying to make this train work to get the heck out of here. And so coincidentally, while they are trying to get this train working and it's going off, we have these people going and sending a bomb through Raccoon City and wiping it out. So as the train is taking off, like everything is kind of like rubbling behind them. And so while that's happening, all of a sudden we have this massive zombie monster that is to be breaking through and ripping through the car that Chris and Jill are to be in. And so we have, of course, Chris and Jill trying to shoot at this, of course, zombified character, but it takes Leon coming back through, and he is to fire a rocket launcher, and both Chris and Jill are like, oh my god, because they're thinking they're going to die at this point, because this guy is like setting off some kind of thing that is going to be some massive explosion that is just going to kill them in the process. But they're like, oh, so you found a rocket launcher? And he's like, yeah, like it's a lucky thing that I found this. Like, yeah, technically it is. So they're like, hey man, like, what did you guys do to this car and this train? And they're like, long story. So really these characters are to go off and get onto this train and get the heck out of here. And so I guess there are very few like survivors of Raccoon City. And so I think that's the way that this movie just kind of fizzles off of. Like, I don't think that there was any actual end credit scenes, but if there actually was, I do apologize because because I watched actually a bootleg version of this movie, not the real legitimate theater version of it. And so like the bootleg version didn't have the end credits. And plus I also like looked it up to see if there was any end credits or see if anybody like YouTubed it or whatever. But no one did. So I'm like, okay, so is there no end credits things to this Raccoon Resident Evil movie? I don't know. People who have probably seen the movie can confirm that to me. And I'll just be like, oh, okay, well, whatever. but people might have just wanted my opinion upon this movie. But with that said, I think that's all that I have to say about this movie. If there's anything that I forgot about, because there might have been a big, huge, gaping thing that I completely had spaced out or forgot about, or maybe something wasn't in correct order of the movie, which I do apologize. But if I got most of the scenes down, I'll be happy about that. But without a doubt, I am going to get out of here. So goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Um, so yeah, like my overall feeling, my overall whatever. Uh, Sorry if I didn't get to all of it, but a lot of jam-packed stuff happening in an hour and a half film. Um, I'm trying to think if there's anything that I forgot about here, and I feel pretty good about this, so I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.